Well, I want to go ahead and welcome you guys to the training today. The topic of our training is going to be online group supervision. We're going to be looking at how efficient this practice is and also the ethics of doing supervision in online practice. I've been a supervisor for about 3 years now. I've been a mental health therapist for 11 years, but got into supervision about 3 years back. I was wanting to learn how to be a better supervisor and learn how to do supervision, and so I've been practicing in this way for a while. I was able to obtain a license, which I'll talk a little bit later on about, and how to a license and training in doing online supervision. And so from my experiences with online supervision, I want to be able to share those with you today and hopefully see if this is something that will be beneficial to you or the people that you are working with. And so we want to look at that topic today. Some of the objectives that we do want to cover is we want to define the traditional view of supervision. I think it's good for us to have a working definition before we begin moving forward. And so just get a basic understanding of what supervision is. And also we'll look at the different group supervision styles. So there are several out there that people are already using, and so we want to see what those group styles look like. And then from that point we want to kind of transition to look at how efficient online supervision is. I mean, does it actually work or not? And so I have a study that I want to present to you today and also give you some of my own practical experiences with it to see how those things work together. Also, just some of the ethics of online supervision. We want to look and see what the code of ethics says about it and how we go about doing this in an ethical manner, because there are some good ways of practicing online and there's some that are not so good. And so we want to make sure we know what the difference is between those two. We also want to do a technology review in online supervision. There are a few pieces of software that I use that I'm a little bit biased towards, and so I'm going to talk to you about those and how I use those in supervision. And also any additional training that you want to do for online supervision. Now, obviously, depending on the state that you're practicing in, it's going to be different each state. I can speak to you about a few states that I do know about and how that practice is taken care of. And so this is kind of where we'll be headed in the next 45 minutes here. Now, when it comes to defining supervision, I want to go back to, I guess, the root book on, it was a seminal book on this topic by Logan, Bill, Hardy, and Delworth. And they define supervision as an intensive, interpersonal, focused, one-to-one relationship in which one person is designated to facilitate the development of therapeutic competence in other people. And underline one particular thing here is that we're facilitating the development. That as supervisees go through the process of supervision, some of them, I don't think they always understand what the purpose of it is. Some may feel like it's just some way for the counseling world to kind of keep an eye over their shoulder. But the reality is the reason why we go through supervision is to make sure we're doing the best we can for the public that we're working with. And so with the process we want to see them go through is a developmental process. We want to see them grow. We want to see the decision-making processes, how those change over time, their particular counseling style, how that changed over time, and even the theory that they use over time. Those things will change. I know personally I've kind of grew up in the whole CBT era and used that quite a bit, but I think over the past couple of years I know I've transitioned out of that a little bit as well and kind of taken on different theory. And so I think all of us as therapists, we may start off in one place as a therapist, but we continue to grow and change. And so what supervision does, it helps us to facilitate that development. But another definition from Bernard and Goodyear says it is to socialize novices into the particular profession's values and ethics. And so there's a socialization piece to it as well. And I believe that's important because I think it's very easy to, as a therapist, to feel like you are alone. Even if you're working in an agency, sometimes you may be working with several people or several coworkers, but sometimes you may feel like you're doing it by yourself, especially if you're not meeting as a staff very frequently, or if you're school-based like some people are and you're bouncing around the schools by yourself. There is a tendency for us to sometimes feel like we are alone in the practice. And so what we want to do is be able to learn how to socialize our therapists, give them an opportunity to work with other therapists. That way we'll learn, once again, how to get along with people and how to deal with problems in counseling. And so the socialization piece is something that is going to need to happen in the process of supervision. Now, when it comes to group supervision styles, there's three main ones that we want to look at today. And as a former as a former group member, I think I've experienced all these from supervisors I've had in the past. One of them is the authoritative viewpoint of group supervision. And what you have in this process here, or in this model, you have a supervisor who pretty much is kind of, it's more of a hierarchical form. You have the supervisor who is up top, and underneath the supervisor you have all the different group members. And so there is a difference, there's obviously a definitely difference in power there, where the supervisor does carry the power, the more kind of in control of everything that's going on there, and the group members tend to kind of learn from that one person. And once again, there's not a good or bad with this model, but it's just a model that is more of a information comes from one place, and each group member pulls it from the supervisor. But once again, the supervisor is definitely the one who is in charge of things in that type of model. There's also what we consider a cooperative model. And in this cooperative model, what we see here is the supervisor ends up being, within the context of the process, they kind of disseminate information, become more of a facilitator. And what happens here is that they maybe will bring a topic, for example, to discuss, and they will allow the group members to discuss and talk about these topics, but they just kind of guide the discussion. It's not them particularly guiding and leading discussion, telling them they need to do certain things, but they're there as a facilitator. They facilitate information. So it's a very cooperative effort. Once again, there still seems to be a difference in control and power there. The group members kind of end up leading this in a big fashion, but the supervisor is there to help guide the information and make sure people get the information that they need. And this third piece is what we call participative. And in this group style, basically each member, including the supervisor, is considered a member of the group. And each member is able to learn and grow from each other. And it's a neat process as well, because the supervisor does not set themselves apart as being the expert, as it is in this model over here with authoritative. They don't consider themselves the expert. They feel like they're once again just a part of this process. And so they're learning from their supervisees as well. In the state of Arkansas, where I practice, our therapists go through a 3-phase model that after they graduate with their master's degree, they have to get 3,000 hours of supervision time. In that first phase, or phase 1 as we call it, they have to have 1,000 hours. And so what ends up happening with a lot of my supervisees, we pretty much start in this process over here in authoritative, where that first phase, the first year, where they're just learning how to become a therapist, how to learn the ins and outs of therapy, just beginning to know what ethics are all about. There is more of a model of there being a supervisor and authoritative role and them learning from me. And the purpose of that is to make sure that they are catching the things they need to catch. But another thing that happens, that the natural progression is this, then phase 2, it does become more cooperative, where I'm there more or less to be a facilitator of knowledge, as they begin to learn from each other in that group process. And so if you know anything about this group dynamics, that naturally begins to happen as people get closer to each other. But around phase 3, where they're getting towards the end of their supervision, about the point where they're about to finish, there's very much this ideology of everybody being participative. Because at this point, even though I've been a therapist longer than them, they still are a peer. And they're not going to be asking me the same questions in phase 3, in this phase, as they do in this beginning phase, because they've been out there, they've got some experience under their belt. And so as we look at these group models, these group styles, all of them, they all have their purpose. Sometimes you can see people mix them all 3 together, but there is a purpose in all of these together. Now, as we've looked already at these different models, next we want to talk a little bit about is efficacy of online supervision. How do you end up measuring supervision effectiveness? I guess a bare bones answer is, are you being an ethical therapist? Well, that may be one way of measuring that. But I think there's many different ways to measure, is what we're doing as supervisees actually affecting the practice of our therapists that we're working with. So we want to look at a study here that kind of gives a little picture of what that can look like. And so this definition from Perry in 2012 says this. It says, supervision, whether it's in the same room or via the internet, is effective to the extent that it facilitates growth in professional identity. And I think this is what really boils down to in the end, is that are therapists growing in their professional identity? Do they feel more like a therapist? Are they sounding more like a therapist? Are they following the ethics of a therapist? And as long as we're able to show growth in their professional identity, then we are able to say that what we're doing is being effective. And so it's going to be important for us to be able to have some way of looking at those markers of growth for supervisees to see, are they getting what they need to out of supervision or not. And so, like I said, I want to look at a study here to kind of put a little bit more flesh to this in a more of a empirical sort of way. This is a study that was done back in 2011, and it was a cyber-supervision study. And the purpose of this was to see if supervisees felt like they were growing from doing supervision online. And this is the way it worked. They had 5 female supervisees volunteered for an online practicum experience. So this was a qualitative study. They had a face-to-face orientation meeting where they got together to kind of go over the rules for supervision, to let them know everything that they were going to be involved in for the supervision process. And after that, the rest of their experience was 100% electronic. There were times where they met online and did things together, or maybe in a discussion board or something to that effect. There may have been times where it was actually live. And so there were synchronous and asynchronous aspects to the supervision they were getting, but all of it was done online. And what they ended up doing was measuring for supervisee confidence. Did the supervisees feel confident as a supervisor or as a supervisee, like in their professional identity? What was their confidence level like? It also looked at their competence. Did they feel like they knew what they were talking about when they were with their clients? And also it measured their attitude about the approach. And so it's kind of look at those 3 factors when it came to whether or not they were growing or not. And as you look at the study, one thing we noticed here is that supervisee confidence did increase. From the time they began their practicum to the end of the practicum, they had more confidence as a supervisee. And I'm sure all of us remember the first time we were in that counseling session and how we may be wondering, okay, did I learn anything in my master's program at all? And so that level of confidence is something that's very important. But these supervisees were saying they felt more confident as a result of their cyber supervision. Also, the supervisees had more competence. They felt their competence increased. They felt they learned the skills that were necessary even though it wasn't face-to-face or in a traditional mode. And so the competence increased as well. And also we see that the supervisee's attitude about the approach, it increased, but they wanted it to be optional. And I think this is actually a really important aspect of this, the fact that it was something that they felt like they were comfortable with it, but they didn't want this to be something that was forced upon them. So I think that's something good to, I guess, pull from the study, that there was growth, but also making sure these supervisors had the ability to choose whether or not this is a form in which they do. Now, practically speaking, with the supervisees I currently work with 10 supervisees who are brand new licensed postmaster's therapists. And one thing what we try to do on the practical aspects of it is that this technology part is optional. We do face-to-face type things or they're live. We do also have things that are online, which I'll discuss a little bit more later on in this presentation. But once again, it is something that is optional. Now, when we get to the pros and cons in a few minutes, you will see why many of them are flocking to me or wanting to come to do this because of the ability to do it online. And we'll see why that is in just a second here. Now, when it comes to online supervision, pros and cons, these are some of the pros and cons I was able to come at just from the research and just from practically speaking. One of the first pros is just more productive sessions due to fewer time restraints. It's very difficult, once again, to find a good time to meet with multiple supervisees. I have 10 of them. I have some of them driving in from up to 2 hours away, some of them from other states as well, for supervision. And so finding a good time that 10 therapists can get together almost seems impossible. And so we've been working on trying to figure out ways of how do we do it online. And so I've come up with a few online ways, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes, on how we're able to conduct supervision, but for them to do it at their own convenience and do it on their own timetable. And so the time restraints become less of an issue when they are utilizing it correctly. and also more effective use of supervisee and supervisor time. I've yet to meet a therapist in these past 11 years who has a ton of extra free time. For some reason, we find ourselves consulting, doing therapy, writing, research. We're always doing something because that's just the way we were built. And so many therapists don't have a bunch of extra free time. And so whenever someone does have an extra hour and a half time in their schedule and they're looking for supervision, I want to make sure we can find things to do to fulfill those needs for them. And so when they're able to log on to a website and do supervision and do it on something that's very convenient for them, keeps them happy, keeps me happy, keeps them more effective as therapists, but also we're using their time more wisely instead of worrying about, I'm just spent 2 hours driving to supervision. I was in supervision for 2 hours. I spent 2 hours driving back. So we're wasting less time by being able to do it online. And also there's a larger pool of available supervisors that whenever you have multiple supervisees, if you're having to see all of them face to face, it becomes nearly impossible to give them the attention that you need. I know for my supervisors, I have 10, and there's no way possible that I could see each and every one of them 3 to 4 hours a week individually. It just would not happen. And so by being able to see them online and see them in group and things of that nature, it gives them a more rich experience in supervision and gives them a lot more opportunity for me to work with more people, and it makes it a situation where there's a lot more supervisors who are able to work with supervisees. So I think those are 3 very good pros to the situation. Now, obviously, with everything good, there's always some things that you have to consider. And so here are a couple of cons. And that's the potential expense of technology. Now, notice I put potential. I am going to show you some software that is fairly inexpensive. And once again, it really comes down to what you want to spend. There's software you can buy that costs you $5 a month that works well. There's some you can spend $50 to $100 a month. Once again, it really depends on what you're looking for and what you're needing. And so one thing, I call myself practically cheap. And so I like to make sure I use good technology, but just because it's good does not mean it has to be expensive. And so knowing what is out there and being up to date on that will help you in that manner. That way you're not spending a lot of money on stuff that you can probably find for at least less expensive. Also, varying degrees of experience with technology. I laugh at this one, and I laugh at my supervisees sometimes because many of them are quite a bit younger than me, and I'm assuming they grew up in an era where technology kind of came much easier to them. But I'm finding some of them don't know how to use technology as well. And so that's kind of been a learning curve for them as well, is that technology does make things more convenient, but if you don't know how to use the technology well, then it really doesn't benefit you. And so just the degrees of experience with technology just change. And then also that lack of face-to-face contact, that you do want to have face-to-face contact with your supervisees as you work with them. Once again, the technology does take away from that, depending on what type you use, but that sometimes can be an issue for us. Next, we just want to cover a few of the ethical concerns that we have about online supervision. Once again, looking at Bernard and Goodyear, a couple things that tell us is that the supervisors must be ethical, competent, and have a firm knowledge base, and also be aware of and reflect upon his or her own abilities and expertise. And basically, what they want us to say is that if you want to use technology, you must be very proficient in it first before you're expecting someone else to be able to do it. And also being ethical with it. In the state of Arkansas, there is a specific license to be able to do supervision online, and there are people who are practicing without that license, and so they're not being ethical. They're not trained themselves in it, and so that becomes an issue. And so once again, being ethical when you're using the technology, know what you're doing and know how to use that technology. And also, as a part of informed consent, supervisors want to review the purposes and goals and procedures and potential risk of using technology online with supervision. I'm very careful about using only software that is HIPAA compliant. That's something that my supervisors need to know about as well. And one thing we sit down at the beginning and I tell them how much of their supervision will be online. That way, if this is not something they're wanting to do, it gives them opportunity to maybe look for a different supervisor or someone who uses less technology. But just once again, for my purpose is it's been very beneficial that we've been able to use technology. And so I just want them to know from up front that this is why we use technology. This is how it can be used, but there's always potential risk in any type of when you use technology. Also, supervisors are only providing services which are qualified. I think that goes without saying. You need to know what you're doing if you're providing the services for other people. Also, the supervisor will provide copies of licensure and credentialing and training upon request. On my website, I do have all my qualifications listed for my supervisees, so they'll know exactly what training that I have and how much experience I have in using supervision. And I think that for them has been a comfort for them. That way they know that this is something that has been researched, it's something I am spending time looking into. And so that way they know that they're getting quality work when they do work with a particular supervisor. And also participating in professional organizations related to distance services. There is one group called the International Society of Online Therapists, and they are therapists who work online significantly. And so I've joined different groups that teach you to me more about that. And I think it's important for us to make sure that we are spending time researching it. Technology changes daily, literally, it changes daily. And so things that you learned about in 2011 may not necessarily be something good to use in 2013. And so you have to make sure that you're staying up to date on the software that's coming out and joining groups or professional organizations that can help you to stay up to date in these areas. Also, when it comes to supervisee considerations, making sure you screen your supervisees for appropriateness. Once again, if your supervisee is having difficulty turning their computer on, they may not be a good one to work with using online. And so just making sure they're appropriate for the services. And also be encouraged to review the employer's policies regarding using computers at work. Many agencies are not allowing their supervisees to do supervision online from work, and so we have to come up with different ways of helping them to get the supervision they need, but doing it in an environment that is okay with their employer. And a lot of that just has to do with client confidentiality, because we do talk about clients in an online environment. And so they need to be able to contact their supervisors from work to find out what information they can and cannot give out in an online environment. So that's going to change depending on what agency you're working with. Also, different modes of communications. I use several with my supervisees. I do supervision through VSEE, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes. It's a video chat. I do supervision through text messages. So that's basically, we don't use any names when we do that. But there are several different modes of communication that I use in order to help my supervisees develop through the use of technology. And so the biggest thing is letting them know how to use it and how not to use it. Obviously, I'm never going to send a text message with a client's name in there or any identifying client information. And so being able to know the ins and outs of that and the ethics of that is going to be very beneficial for the client and the supervisee and the supervisor as well. And so making sure they know how to use this in an effective manner. And also, how frequent are you going to do supervision? There is something to be said about face-to-face supervision. I think it still does work. I think it's still effective. And so you obviously don't want a supervisor who only wants to meet online because it's just convenient that way. I still want to see them face-to-face. I want to know what's going on with them, and that doesn't happen really well if I'm only seeing them online. And so just the frequency of communication becomes an issue. Also, record keeping as well becomes a bit of a challenge, but it is still workable. One thing I keep very tedious logs of when I'm meeting with my supervisees, and that becomes more of a burden for me, especially when they're calling me on the phone or they can email me or text me, different things like that. And so I have to make sure I'm keeping really good records. I'm trying to keep up the date of when the supervisee is meeting with me, how long we met online, things of that nature. And so if you are not an organized person, that can become very confusing very quickly. And so it's going to be important to make sure you are keeping good records when you are working with your supervisees to make sure that they are getting the proper attention they need, but also that you're keeping good records so they can get credit for the time they're spending. All right, next I want to talk about two different technologies that are out there that I use the most. There are several. I will be doing another training later on talking about more of these technologies, but for today's purposes, I just wanted to talk to you about two of them that I use frequently. The first one is called VSEE. It is VSEE.com is where you will find that software. And VSEE is pretty much the cousin of Skype. The biggest difference between Skype and VSEE is that VSEE is HIPAA compliant. There's a lot of debate out there about Skype and whether or not Skype is good. We should not be using, or we should use Skype or not. At the end of the day, the reality is Skype was never purposely written for or meant to be used for online supervision or therapy. They weren't thinking about that when they created that software. There are people who still use Skype for supervision. Purposely, I have switched over to VSEE. There are some features of Skype I feel like are still better than VSEE. I think the clarity of picture is actually a little bit better on Skype. This is my personal opinion. But VSEE is still very compatible and very comparable with Skype. And the fact that it is HIPAA compliant does make a big difference. You can do video chats over the internet with it. You can call people from who have VSEE, and the software is free. You can do instant messaging. I can share my screen with my supervisee. So maybe a situation where we may do a case study, and so I'll pull a case study up on my computer screen, and they can all look at it, and we can discuss it from there. So it's a good software. On the free version of it, there's a couple things that aren't, a couple features that you can't use. On the paid version, you can actually record the sessions as you do, which I think is a very beneficial thing to do. But the paid account does have many more free features on it than the free version. But like I said, the VSEE, the free version of it, I think it works very well. I wish the picture quality could be a little bit better, but overall it is very good software that I would suggest. Next you see here is a screenshot, and this is not me, but this is a screenshot of what it looks like. You'll notice on both sides you have 8 people who are here talking about the exact same topic, and so you can use video. You can all have your video on the same time. You can hear your voice. You can share documents in between people. You can work on stuff together. And so when you have multiple supervisees, you still continue to be able to have that sense of community that they are looking for, and they're able to grow and develop from that. But you're also able to once again continue the process of that group therapy, not necessarily group therapy, but the group dynamics continue because you can still see and hear each other. But this is a little picture of what VSEE looks like. This next one is called VoiceThread. VoiceThread has become one of my favorite friends. What you can do with VoiceThread, you're able to do 3 main things with it. You can upload, share, and discuss documents, presentations, images, audio files. Just 50 different types of media can be used in a VoiceThread. What I like about this is one of those situations where I can post data online. And my supervisees can go back and look at it throughout the week, and they can discuss it among themselves, and I can listen to the conversation and be a part of it later on. And so, for example, I did a presentation a few weeks ago on the psychological effects of divorce. And so what I did was I had a video presentation, kind of like what we're doing right now. I posted it on VoiceThread. So before the VoiceThread started, I told my supervisees, I need you to listen to this presentation, and here's 3 questions I want you to answer this week dealing with this material. They watched the video, and what they would do is they would record their comment to that video. And so once their comment was on there, every other supervisee that came on there, they were able to listen to the original post from the video presentation and also see what everyone else commented, and they can leave their own comment. The beautiful part about it was that they were able to do this on their own timetable. Basically, I gave them the week to work on this presentation. They were able to talk back and forth through an entire week, and it gave them opportunity to talk about a topic, to get more education, to be developed as therapists, but not be there at the exact same time. And so these voice threads are really, really neat. I'm going to show you a little screenshot of one of them here. This one here was called the process of social development and friendship formation. And so here I am right here. At the beginning of this presentation, the supervisees pressed play. Then the presentation played. The first thing they saw was my little head pop up here, and I asked them 3 questions they need to answer this week about the presentation. So they went through and watched the entire presentation. Then my supervisee here, he watched the presentation, and he left a voice comment or a video comment about what he saw. And then later on in the week, she did the exact same thing. She did it, and another supervisor did it as well. And so what you have is, you have these supervisors able to go back and listen to the presentation, but also see what other people have to say about this presentation. And they were able to leave comments as well about what was going on and what their thought process was when it came to this particular topic. And what this did was it allowed them an opportunity to discuss a topic, to get more information about it, something that's research-based, but once again, get the opinions of other people. And so that community was continued to be shared online. And once again, it's got a lot of great feedback from our supervisors on the VoiceThread. And once again, a VoiceThread, cannot remember the price of it. It's fairly inexpensive. There's a small fee that goes along with it. If I'm not mistaken, I think it may be $50 a year, if I'm not mistaken. But from my personal opinion, it's well worth the price when you consider being able to provide supervision when you're not actually there face to face with the supervisees. Now, when it comes to formal training, I'm going to tell you about 2 different trainings that are out there, specifically in the state of Arkansas. If you're going to be a supervisor and want to provide technology online, you have to have a license in supervision, technology-assisted supervision. There are 2 main groups that are providing this therapy, these trainings right now. The first one is called ReadyMinds.com. And they have a 15-hour training that's NBCC approved, and you can take it on ground or online. And this is actually the original course I took several years ago when I wanted to become a supervisor. It costs $600 for the training, and once again, they are the first ones to do a training like this. And so I do have to, you have to tip your hat off to the people who are first. And so they were the first to come up with any type of formalized training on doing therapy online or doing supervision online. And so that's the course that they did. I took their course, like I said, about 3 years ago, and after that, I went back and I wrote my own. Mine was a little bit updated, a little bit different information from what they provide. Mine talks more about using video and things like that, and it's a little bit different type of training, but it does cover the same material, but some additional things as well. The one I do is also 15 hours. As well as NBCC approved. It's also, but it's online only, and so it's something you can kind of do at your own pace. And so that is just two of the trainings that if you want to get more serious about doing supervision online, or even doing therapy online, those are 2 places you can get some training on those topics, and I feel like those are 2 very good places to begin. All right, this next slide is just the references from the presentation today, so you know that I didn't just make this stuff up off the top of my head. What I'm going to do is open up for any questions that you, any questions you may have, and see if you have any questions, and then if not, then we will finish up. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Well, if there are not any questions, I want to thank you for coming to the presentation today. You will be receiving an email that will tell you instructions on how to get your continuing education units, and that should be ready within the next hour. Thank you again for coming today, and I look forward to hopefully working with you guys again in the future. Hope you have a great day.